Hi, everyone. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona. This is Daily Racing Forum's Derby Watch. The Kentucky Derby post-position draw is days away, Saturday, April 27th. And until then, David, Derby Watch list, the top 20 on the list, has remained fairly constant since last week, which has kind of been a theme all season long.
Yeah, I really didn't have a reason to tweak too much since last week before the post-position draw. Maybe that'll change some things. We'll see where some of the main contenders end up in the starting gate, but not too many changes. I think we're still expecting to hear some things around a couple of contenders that might not be fully confirmed for the Kentucky Derby just yet, but I think a lot of those connections are waiting until the last second to make a decision.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Derby Watch chart. And the two horses that I think you were referring to, David, Endlessly, a turf synthetic specialist who qualifies for the Kentucky Derby. We don't know if he's running in the Derby or the Grade 2 American Turf on the Derby undercard. And the other horse whose status is uncertain right now is Encino after he won the Lexington recently. So first in from the also eligible list, we're not going to do an on the bubble segment this week, but the first one in will be Epic Ride, third place finisher in the Bluegrass. I guess there could be another one added to the field if both Endlessly and Encino come out. But as you said, we're kind of awaiting word on those. How do you feel about 3-1 and 7-2, which Fierceness and Sierra Leone have been for several weeks now? Are you still confident in those prices?
Yeah, I set those prices right after the Bluegrass, and I still feel pretty comfortable with that. It does feel like they're going to be the two favorites and the two clear-cut favorites, separating themselves from the rest of the field. I don't think it's the kind of Derby where we're going to have a horse go off in the 2-1 or 5-2 range. It's a wide open enough race for that, and the presence of two horses that are going to attract as much support as these two are, it makes it difficult for a horse to go off at as short a price as we sometimes can see in the Kentucky Derby when there's one clear standout. So I feel comfortable with it. I know there's some talk from different quarters that maybe Sierra Leone could even go favorite in the race, but I'm going to stick with this for now.
I think you're sticking with the right horse as the favorite. I've thought about that. I've considered what it might take for Sierra Leone to go favorite. I think I'd be surprised if that happens. I guess if, Fierceness draws the rail and he's inside Track Phantom and Door Knock and it looks like the pace is going to be extreme, I suppose you could make a case that Sierra Leone could possibly go favored. But the speed figure advantage that Fierceness has, and speed figures are the most relevant factor for betting parimutuel odds. Let me rephrase that. That is the one factor that influences price more than any other factor, speed figures, in my opinion, and he has a huge advantage, 12-point advantage. We're going to talk about a few things today, including the pace of the Derby, betting the Derby, pros and cons with regards to the early favorite Fierceness. And let's start off, David, to talk about pace. The pace setter's role is going to be largely determined by post position and the strategy that is dictated by the post draw. But at this juncture, days out from the post draw, it seems like there are four candidates to either set and or influence the pace.
It does seem that way, and Fierceness has to be towards the top of that list. He comes off that gate-to-wire victory in the Florida Derby, where he was setting a much more moderate pace than he is likely to encounter in the Kentucky Derby. And I think the post-position draw is going to be critical, not just for Fierceness, but how fast this pace plays out with regard to where Fierceness is in the early stages. Because if Fierceness draws in post 6 or lower, post 5, post 4, down towards the inside, and there are other speeds outside of him, they almost have to go with him and send him to the front end because they don't want to get this horse in behind others taking kickback. I think that would be the worst position for Fierceness to be in the early going. If Fierceness draws out somewhere in 15 or 16, maybe they've got more options to just ride him into the race outside of horses clear from the kickback and see what others do to the inside. That would probably be the preferable situation for Todd Pletcher and Mike Rapoli. But if he's drawn inside, I think that's going to dictate a much faster pace because there are other horses in here that want to be forward. Just the Touch is a horse that I'll be very interested to see how is ridden because he's coming out of one of the fastest paced preps that we saw in the Bluegrass and was right on top of a pace that, while it was falling apart for Sierra Leone to win, it did hold together in terms of other speeds doing well in the race, but still, Just the Touch was chasing some fast fractions that day, and he's shown that he's a horse that can stay up close to a fast pace and keep going.
Let's take a look at the past performances of the 4 potential Derby pace setters. And I emphasize the word potential because the post position draw will have a lot to do with how these horses are ridden. Fierceness, David talked about, just a touch out of the fast-paced Bluegrass. He wasn't on the lead, but he was pressing a very fast pace. And then the other 2, Track Phantom and Dornoch, who seem to be need the lead types. But David, looking at these 4 horses, Fierceness, Just a Touch, Track Phantom, and Dornoch, I don't think we're going to get a 45 and change half mile like we did each of the last 2 years when Mage rallied from 16th last year. They went the half in 45 and 3. 2 years ago, Rich Strike came from 18th after a 45 and 1 half, but 3 years ago, Medina Spirit got loose in 46 and 3 and was long gone. I suspect, right as of today, that this Derby pace scenario could unfold at a relatively tepid clip. What do you think about that?
You know, Brad, it's the Derby, and I think connections want to stay out of that trouble, and you just end up getting a lot of connections making the same decision, which is to just be aggressive out of the starting gate and then make decisions after that. We typically see that in the Kentucky Derby. I remember having a very similar conversation last year when this group of 3-year-olds looked like it didn't contain too many frontrunners, and suddenly they break from the gate, and Kingsbarns, a horse that hadn't run particularly fast in the prep races, was contesting the pace through a very fast opening half mile at around 46, and it caused things to fall apart for Mage to ultimately come from far back and win. So I think with a 20-horse field, the Derby is just a race that produces a faster pace than sometimes it looks like it might based on the running styles just on paper. And horses like Track Phantom and Dornoch could play a big role in that because I think their connections have been pretty clear that they want to have them forward. Danny Gargan has said explicitly that he wants Dornoch to either be on the lead or contesting the pace in the Derby because he feels like that's how his horse runs his better races. Track Phantom, adding blinkers for this race, has run his best races on the lead, so it would be somewhat of a surprise if he was taken off the pace. And while they may be not natural sprinters, I think they're going to go forward and potentially ensure a quick pace. And like I said, if Fierceness is drawn inside, I think that's also going to really speed up the pace.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point, David. The Derby pace often comes up a lot quicker than anticipated. This would not be the first time I've been wrong about the Kentucky Derby pace scenario. But as of today, I'm just very curious to see where these horses draw in relation to one another and the rest of the field. Fierceness, Just a Touch, Track Phantom, and Dornoch. David, I think that you and Craig Milkowski are going to take a deeper dive into the pace analysis in an upcoming video.
Yeah, we're going to do our Timeform US Pacecast early next week, going through all of the Derby contenders, and we'll take a deep dive into that Timeform US pace projector and talk about the pace situation and some scenarios about how it could play out.
All right. Fierceness and Just a Touch among the top contenders with early speed. They'll have to deal with Track Phantom and Dornoch. Okay, let's talk a little bit about betting the Derby. And this race in the last 5 years has been a long shot player's dream. When we take a look at the recent prices, Mage last year at 15-1, Rich Strike, he's impossible to find, and so was Country House back in 2019. They paid $163 and $132 respectively. Medina Spirit got loose. He won the wire to wire in the 2021 Derby, and in 2020 Authentic. To me, that really wasn't a Derby. It was run in September. It was a crazy year, and he wired the field. But so 5 consecutive long shot winners in the Derby. But before that, 6 consecutive years of winning favorites. Started with Orb back in 2013. He was actually the 5-1 favorite. He paid $12.80. California Chrome, American Pharaoh, Nyquist, Always Dreamin', and Justify. All favorites, 6 consecutive winning favorites. Just when we thought a long shot would never win the Derby again, along come 5 consecutive long shots. So I guess the question this year, David, is what are the, some horses have to slip through the cracks because Fierceness and Sierra Leone are going to attract a lot of support. How do you see some of these fringe players, drifting about in their odds, considering that the 2 favorites seem to kind of stand out?
Yeah, I'm kind of breaking these horses into different tiers. Obviously, the first tier is Fierceness and Sierra Leone. If you're going with the favorites, they're the two for you. Then you've got that second tier, and you can kind of see it on my Derby Watch odds line. Those three horses that I think are going to be somewhere between 8-1 and 12-1, those being Forever Young, Catching Freedom, as well as Just a Touch. And, those types of horses, maybe you could say that there's value on any one of them if you like them, because they've shown ability that's similar to the top two, or at least similar to a horse like Sierra Leone, and they're probably going to be maybe twice the price of a horse like that. So you could make the argument, if you're a fan of any one of those horses, that they're potentially value at those prices. And then you move down to that next tier of horses that are going to be somewhere in that 20 to 25-1 range. And there's probably going to be a lot of them. And you could start to make cases for horses like that. But I wonder which one of those is maybe going to break out and take more money than we expect. A horse like Just Steel going out for the very popular Dwayne Lucas. I could see him taking some money. Honor Marie is a horse that I know has been attracting some steam coming into the Kentucky Derby based on how he's trading and his upward trajectory. So I'll be interested to see if any of these horses end up going off a little bit lower than maybe you're expecting based on form or the odds that we've seen so far. But in terms of looking for value from my perspective, I still have some decisions to make about who I'm going to land on. I am checking out horses like Honor Marie. Also a little interested in a horse like Catching Freedom for the case that I just made for him. Maybe 10-1 actually is value on a horse like that. And even Forever Young is one that I'm tossing around a little bit in my brain. So many ways you can go from a value standpoint in this Derby.
Yeah, I mean, in a 20-horse field, you're going to get value. Even if you like the favorite, you're going to get paid off in a 20-horse field. But it's kind of a relatively large gap from the second to the third choice, 7-2 to 8-1. That's not the type of price that you would normally see on a Friday at Aqueduct, right?
No, definitely not. And you don't encounter 20-horse fields every day in horse racing anymore. And so the Kentucky Derby, it is a unique race from that perspective. And if you do like a horse that is not taking up all this oxygen like Fierceness and Sierra Leone are, you probably are going to get the right kind of price on that horse, unless you're a big fan of some of the horses down towards the bottom of this ranking. Because what we have seen in Derby since Rich Strike is that there's a cap on how high some of these odds can go. Just last year, it was only an 18-horse field compared to 20, but the biggest price in the race was Jace's Road, who was 33-1. And I think most handicappers would argue that fair value on Jace's Road was quite a bit higher than 33-1. I don't think his chances of winning were quite that high. So, I mean, if you're a fan of a horse like, let's say, West Saratoga or Society Man, you might not be getting the value that you really deserve on those types.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I actually agree with that, David. And the reason I say that is just based on your early line. Those two favorites, Fierceness and Sierra Leone, 3-1 and 7-2 in a 20-horse field, that basically reflects what you're trying to do as an odds maker, and that is, predict what the public is going to do. And I think they're going to gravitate toward those two colts, and somebody somewhere on this list, the other 18 horses, are going to float away and be much higher than they thought. I mean, a horse like T.O. Password, if he went off at 99-1, it would not surprise me one bit. Very interesting dynamic with regards to wagering on the Kentucky Derby. I went back and looked at some recent exacta payoffs for the Derby. In the last 11 years, the races that we're just kind of talking about, $2 exacta payoffs, 4 of them paid less than $100. 2 of them paid more than $1,000, and the other 5 were right there in the middle. So the payoffs are all over the map. Whoever you like, you're going to get paid. And so that brings me to the next situation. I want to talk a little bit about the favorite, and his name is Fierceness. And I've said this before, I'm generally reluctant to be excessively bullish on a Kentucky Derby favorite. I'm also reluctant to disparage a long shot. There's just no upside to either viewpoint. If you love the favorite, well, so what? Everybody else does too. If you knock a long shot and he loses, yeah, he was supposed to lose, but if he wins, you look like an idiot. But today, a week and a half out from the Kentucky Derby, allow me to please restate the obvious, and that is that Fierceness was the fastest 2-year-old last year. He has a significant speed figure advantage this year. In fact, he has a 12-point advantage as far as last start speed figures go, 110 to 98. That's a 12-point edge. And assuming a favorable draw for Fierceness, I think he's likely for a good trip pressing the pace. As for his inconsistency, I know that is a huge concern for a lot of handicappers, understandably so. It's not as much a worry to me. And one big reason for that is because who rides him? John Velasquez rode him for the first time in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He had a good trip. He won the race in a romp. He got banged around at the start of the Holy Bull and sputtered. And then in the Florida Derby, Velasquez was intent on establishing early position. It was easy to do post 8 in a 9-horse field, and he won in a romp. But I believe that Velasquez knows better than anyone how important it will be for Fierceness to break from the gate, establish position. I mean, he knows as well, he knows probably better than anyone that Fierceness is capable of throwing in an occasional dud. But if he breaks running, I think there is a greater chance that Fierceness will do exactly what he did last time out. And let's take a look at what this horse looked like. Given a perfect trip, lone speed, and a relatively otherwise paceless race, Fierceness kind of won in a landslide. And so, David, as we're watching him win by more than 13 lengths, this sets up my next question to you. After watching this, how can you not like Fierceness?
I think my take on him is a little different than yours, Brad, because I know the narrative around him is either he shows up and wins or the bad version of Fierceness shows up and he's off the board. I view him a little differently. His two big victories in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile and the Florida Derby, it's undeniable. Those were very soft-paced races. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile, he did stalk a little bit. He sat outside of another rival, but they went 47 and change to the half. It was not a race with much pace in it, and he was able to sprint home in a race that really disadvantaged the closers. And the Florida Derby, similar situation, like you just said. There was no pace to go with him, and he got away with some pretty soft fractions in there. And just on principle, I'm just against horses like this moving into the Kentucky Derby. Yes, he's run the huge speed figures, but he hasn't overcome the kind of situation that he is very likely to encounter in the Kentucky Derby. Even if he makes the lead, I think the pace is going to be faster than what has been in his comfort zone when he's earned these big victories. The Derby is typically a race where they go really fast for a quarter mile, slow it down mid-race, and then you've got to sustain it at the end. And I haven't seen Fierceness run that kind of pace situation yet and be successful. So that's the reason why I am leaning towards being against him and viewing him as maybe the worst value option as opposed to Sierra Leone.
All right, those are very fair criticisms. So let's talk a little bit about betting strategy. And I'm not going to recommend any wagers. I am just going to detail where I am with my own personal betting strategy. And everybody's different. And for me, Derby betting begins weeks ahead of the race. Going into next Saturday, I have 6 horses covered in various future wagers. I don't like any of them, to be perfectly honest. I have Forever Young at 45-1. That's not a bet I would have made. It was a gift from a friend who went to Vegas early this year, asked me who I should bet in the Derby future wagers. I said, Forever Young at 45-1 looks like a tempting price. Well, he bet him pretty good and gave me a token wager. I don't think that Forever Young is he has a lot of things to overcome in order to score an upset, but I can now at 45-1, I have him as a saver. The other 5 horses that I have, since Churchill Downs expanded the Kentucky Derby future wager from 23 individual horses to 39 individual horses, my interest has somewhat waned because I don't generally bet an individual horse in the future wager. I like the all others. I like to embrace chaos. And so I went for the all others in pool 5. I got 11-1. And the 5 horses that I have are the 5 lowest rated horses on Derby Watch: Catalytic, Grand Mo the First, Society Man, Tio Password, and West Saratoga. So in the case of Forever Young and those 5 horses, those to me are just going to be savers. But the long shot I do expect to fiddle with on Derby Day, provided his price is right. And David, after hearing you mention him earlier, I'm not so sure that Just Steel's price will be just right. I'm not going to pick Just Steel to win the race. But even if he drops down a little bit to 15-1 or higher, I will be betting him to win. I will also be betting him in exactas and trifectas under Fierceness and Sierra Leone, and I will press with Fierceness. But Just Steel, to me, is the one horse I am interested in tinkering with if his price is right. David, it's early. You've outlined plenty of legitimate reasons to go against Fierceness. But before we wrap up, any preliminary betting ideas? And also want to ask you about some thoughts on Forever Young.
Well, for the record, I'm not your friend in Vegas who had the 45-1 on Forever Young, because I would have kept all of that for myself. I do think that Forever Young is an interesting horse in the race. I don't know that he's going to be the right price. At the 8-1 that I haven't pegged on Derby Watch, I wonder if that's a little low for a horse that really does still have some things to prove. And I know we've talked a lot about the Dubai Jinx and not being able to win via that route. I have a little bit of a different take on it. I think that the wrong horses with the wrong attributes have come over through that route over the years. Horses that scored front-running victories. Forever Young is not that kind of horse. He's shown attributes that I think are going to be way more adaptable to success in the Kentucky Derby. So I am interested in him. I think he's going to run well in the race. Just a question of whether or not he's the right bet. I find myself watching some of the workouts recently. I follow our colleague Mike Welsh's workout report very closely, and a couple of horses that I've liked the way they're training are Catching Freedom, who I talked about not liking the way he was working early in the season, and to me, he's done a 180. We'll see if that results in him doing a better performance on the first Saturday in May. And Honor Marie as well, a horse that didn't really look fit early in the season, seems like he's coming along at the right time. He's one that I know a lot of people seem like they're becoming a fan of late in the game. So I wonder if he's a horse that could drift down a little bit, but they're two that are definitely on my radar as well.
Well, both those two long shots that you just mentioned, Honor Marie and Catching Freedom, and the fact that you're kind of potentially against Fierceness, you think the pace is going to be quicker than I do. I'm expecting a relatively tepid pace, which is one reason why I'm kind of bullish, on Fierceness. Big deal as the favorite. We'll see what happens and who's right and who's wrong with regards to the pace scenario. I wish there was a way to accurately predict exactly what the pace is. Make this game a lot easier. But it's a lot of fun anyway. And the Kentucky Derby draw for post position is days away. It's this Saturday. We still have a week to finalize everything, to second guess everything. Daily Race Informed will have you covered with workout reports, on-site editorial coverage, video previews, post-race analysis. David and I both appreciate everyone who has viewed Derby Watch this season. So for David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we will see you down the road.